so much for coming out this evening. It's a frosty one, so I appreciate your dedication to the event. I am the Vice President of ROUSI, which is the Royal Alberta United Services Institute. I would like to just tell you a little bit about ROUSI if you're not familiar with this organization. We began as a think tank just after the First World War, based out of Calgary here, and evolved over the decades into a veterans organization. A couple of years ago, the ROUSI board decided to evolve back into a think tank to be able to present speakers. And so events like this and on Zoom, we present 3 or 4 times each season. And the topics are quite diverse, but all around the topic of security and defense. And so we encourage membership in ROUSI so that we can continue to host these events. And there is a card on the back table that gives you some information about ROUSI and how to join if you would like to do that if you're not already a member. And I also want to just point out the fact that we have book sales. So our guest speaker tonight, who we'll get into in just a moment, Lieutenant General Maisonneuve, of course, is selling his books in defense of Canada, which is one of the reasons why we've brought him out here, because we're really excited about the new book and we're really excited about the conversation that we're going to have tonight. And also we have Frederick Moret, who's going to be our moderator tonight, and Fred is also retired military. He was with the Strathconas and the Reserves for a good part of his career. He was also he's also specialized in the security industry, security operations. So we're in good hands here tonight. The Lieutenant General Maisonneuve will speak to us for about 30 minutes, and then we will take questions from the audience. So we welcome a rousing discussion and dialogue. Please keep it respectful. And we're really looking forward to this evening. So thank you so much for coming out. I'll turn the mic over now to Fred.
Thank you, Karen. So I'm an old Strathcona, as Karen was mentioning. I was a young corporal out here when the Strats were based in Calgary. It gives me a great pleasure to be your MC for tonight, and I will be moderating the question period after the General has made his comments. But I'd like to start this evening with a quote that really struck me reading the General's book. And if you can see, there's a bunch of notes that were made. I got into the matter, quite seriously. I encourage you to read this book. This is not a selling pitch. I encourage you to read the book. So this quote, it touches directly on tonight's discussions. So consider this: we are honorable, people of peace. We use our military power sparingly. But when we do so with full conviction, gathering our forces as men and women who believe that the freedoms we enjoy cannot be taken from us. This clarity focuses our might in terrible times. And whenever and wherever we unleash that might, we raise our grateful voices and our prayers to honor those who have stood in harm's way. And if you haven't guessed who this is, this was the Right Honorable Stephen Harper during his last speech from the throne. So I think it stands us in good stead for the conversations that we're going to have tonight. We'd just like to reiterate, we're looking for respectful discussion, respectful debate, even if it comes to debate, and then we'll have a good time. I'm pleased to introduce a fellow Black Hatter. Michel Maisonneuve completed 35 years of active service in the Canadian Armed Forces in May of 2007. He's a tank officer from 12e Régiment Blindé du Canada. He served in many locales throughout Canada and for a total of 10 years outside the country on operational missions and international positions, eventually rising to the rank of Lieutenant General. Along the way, his exemplary service was recognized by awards from Canada, the US, France, and NATO. Michel testified in The Hague against Slobodan Milosevic. He commanded the funeral for the unknown soldier in Ottawa and was the first Chief of Staff of NATO's Supreme Allied Command transformation. After his service in uniform, he continued to serve Canada as the first academic director of Royal Military College in Saint-Jean on its reopening in December 2007, and for more than 10 years afterwards. He was named the 30th laureate of the Vimy Award in 2022 for his exceptional contribution to Canada's security and defense and the preservation of its democratic values. A native and bilingual Quebecer, as I am as well, Michel is passionate about veterans and serving military personnel, the preservation of Canada's proud history, the importance of volunteerism, leadership and service in our country, and the freedom and willingness to participate in its development. Known by some as the anti-woke general, this will be a most interesting discussion about some of the challenges in leadership and citizenship we are facing as a country now. Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Général Michel Maisonneuve.
Merci beaucoup, Frédéric. Chers amis, mesdames et messieurs, merci beaucoup pour votre présence. Je suis très heureux d'être parmi vous ce soir. Merci, Karen, pour cette invitation. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here in this wickedly cold night. I came from Niagara, where it's 5 degrees, and I'm going back there tomorrow. It's excellent. It's so good to be here in Calgary, home of the Stampede, the unforgettable 1988 Winter Olympics, and my friend Bill Pratt, and the place the Flames and Stampeders call home. It's also, believe it or not, where my parents and my sister Lise lived for many years. It's a pretty special place. My parents were pure French Canadian, 10th generation. But here in Calgary, in the middle of Western Canada, believe it or not, they lived in French. They rented an apartment owned by the French Society of Calgary right beside their church, Sainte-Famille, on 5th Street Southwest. And my dad, in his 70s, drove a park and fly bus for the airport. You can imagine the scene. A big chubby guy in jeans, wearing cowboy boots and a Stetson, getting off the bus to help ladies with their luggage. Then he'd open his mouth and spoke with a huge French accent. Bonjour, welcome to Calgary. But my parents and sister loved Calgary. And right here in Calgary, of course, in 1969, the iconic beverage, probably the best for hangovers, the Caesar, was born. I've used the cure myself many times. So I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for being here. So what I want to do tonight is offer my views on the state of our country, the state of our leadership, our citizens, and our armed forces. My small book is just one opinion, my opinion, on where our country is today. I've been unhappy with the state of Canada for many years, but especially since 2015. And as was mentioned, I was honored to receive the 2020 Vimy Award, and I decided at that time that my acceptance speech would be somewhat different than those of previous laureates. I was going to explain how, in my view, Canada used to be great, and that I was now unhappy with where it stood and where it was headed. I said at that time, and I quote, "Canada, once we were great. We stopped the Americans in 1812. We gave the world Billy Bishop, Alexander Graham Bell, and Lucy Maud Montgomery. We isolated insulin. We invented the zipper and the snowblower for obvious reasons. In World War I, we mobilized 620,000 troops, and we were victorious at Vimy Ridge. In World War II, we were brave enough to land at Dieppe, and we were the only ones to secure our beach on D-Day. Our small country boasted the world's 3rd largest navy at the end of that conflict. We then became the world's peacekeepers, with 80,000 of us serving during the Cold War. We beat the Russians on their ice in 1972, and a young man named Terry Fox continues to inspire us all with his unparalleled courage and determination. We gave the world the Canadarm in space. We won a World Series. And when the world changed again at 9/11, Canada stepped up. First to join the coalition of the willing and send in ships and JTF-2. Serving with distinction in Afghanistan, we still mourn the loss of our 159 men and women. Canada was a great nation, and though we're faltering today, I believe we can be great again, unquote. Now, as we know, with these words, I kicked over a hornet's nest in Ottawa, which lives in a bubble, probably even more than Toronto. And my remarks, though caustic, were meant to create a dialogue, but they ended up more like throwing a grenade in the middle of a garden party. My main premise is that there is a crisis of leadership and a crisis of complacency in our country today. Our leaders are not leading us, or they're leading us towards a dystopian future where Canada, our country, is an amalgam of pieces that not only do not fit together, they repel each other. Our country has unlimited potential, but consistently fails to achieve it. And Canadians seem untroubled. One result of this complacency is that the percentage of Canadians who feel a deep emotional attachment to Canada has gone from 62% in 2016 to 49% today. You compare this to our neighbors to the south, where 85% feel patriotic about their country, in spite of, or maybe because of their new president. Now, maybe one of the reasons for our complacency is that if you dare to protest against or deviate from the current progressive narrative, this could lead to the invocation of the Emergencies Act and the freezing of your bank accounts. Cependant, le monde aujourd'hui est de plus en plus dangereux. The world has become more, not less, dangerous since World War II. Today we have what we could call a new Eurasian axis of evil, with Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China collaborating with each other to interfere in our elections and everyday lives, and to disrupt the rules-based international order. We have state-on-state aggression, shooting wars, threats from non-state actors, terrorism, corruption, anti-Semitism, cyber attacks, and everything in between. Once again, that seems to bother no one except intelligence officers and experts. There is no sense of urgency to prepare our country for the worst that can happen. So here we are in February 25th, 2025. The last 3 months have demonstrated that sometimes you just can't make this stuff up. Let's look at what's happened. Against all odds, the United States elected Donald Trump one more time. And we've seen that he was ready for it. And I'll come back to him in a minute. In December, just before presenting her economic update in the House of Commons, our Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister was to be fired. But she instead decided, "You can't fire me, I quit." After this, we were in a situation where not only had the opposition parties lost confidence in our Prime Minister, but his own provincial Liberal caucuses from different provinces wrote to tell him that they wanted him to go. So the Prime Minister went on a reflecting ski holiday over the Christmas break, and then when he and everybody came back to work, he decided to kind of resign, but to remain as Prime Minister. He had other options if he had thought about the country instead of about himself or the Liberal Party. And if you watched his press conference outside Rideau Cottage, you may have noticed that there was not much mea culpaing to be heard. Instead, it seemed Canadians had let him down, his caucus had let him down, and no one knew what they were doing except, of course, him. Bon. Maintenant, les jeux sont faits, la course est partie, et les candidats à la chefferie se sont lancés dans la mêlée. Now the race is on. A few candidates are primed and ready to take on the mantle of leadership of the Liberal Party. But really, for me, since then, the problem we have is who's really in charge? Who, at this point, is leading our country? Now, back to President Trump. You may have witnessed the inauguration in Washington, D.C. It was a huge event, the biggest ever. Even before he was elected this time, the president was ready to assume the mantle of leadership of the country. He had his appointments ready to be confirmed, and he knew what he wanted to accomplish. The guy who wrote The Art of the Deal in 1987 was ready to deal. He made sure that some of his opening positions were clear weeks ago. 25% tariff across the board against Canada and Mexico. Start paying your way in NATO instead of being a free rider. And Hamas had better return the Israeli hostages or all hell will break loose. That last promise seems to have come to fruition, at least. I think that with respect to Canada, President Trump is well aware of our crisis of leadership, and he sees an opportunity. As the Canadian founder of BlackBerry, Jim Balzili, says, no country with our potential inflicts as much damage to its own economic prosperity and sovereignty as Canada. Now, I'm sure not many of us would like to invite President Trump to our dinner table, but that does not matter. He has a mandate from the American people. He won the popular vote in both houses of Congress. So we need to stop bickering about how bad he is and start responding to him. Which brings us back to our country. Who is leading our country at this difficult time? Now, maybe it doesn't matter because our Prime Minister has said that Canada is not really a country, but a post-national state with no core identity. Actually, I heard something interesting the other day that you could consider our country a pre-national state, a group of provinces that are really not tied together to the point that we don't even have completely free trade between them. Sadly, I believe that many of the extreme progressive policies of this government have permeated the mind of many Canadians, and they've bought into the idea. Have we ever defined what a Canadian is? Is the only way we can describe ourselves as being not American? Even our Prime Minister, in an interview with a US outlet, used that description, implying that we're better than Americans. How demeaning to his host. Obviously, he thinks this is all we are, non-American. Well, I, for one, appreciate and admire many of the qualities Americans have shown throughout their history. Their selflessness, their patriotism, their generosity, their friendship, and their willingness to step in whenever needed to stop the bad guys. We describe the U.S. as a melting pot where immigrants arrive and are assimilated into the nation as they pursue the American dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In Canada, we followed the maxim of Trudeau I, a multicultural mosaic of hyphenated Canadians living side by side. Our current Prime Minister just took it to the next level when he explained that this mosaic has no real culture of its own. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I reject that notion. I believe the mosaic needs to die. We need Canadians to start being proud of the values that unite us. Values we defended in 2 world wars and others before and since. And where will we find those values? We'll find them in our history, in our experiences, and in our heroes. That's where. Perhaps we should thank President Trump for stirring up some patriotism. I mean, you had Jean Chrétien, the petit gars de Shawinigan, write an open letter to the president explaining that Canadians are committed to their independence. And Alan Rock, a former minister and ambassador to the US, also whinging about being a proud Canadian and describing our understated patriotism. Well, I think we need a little bit less understated patriotism. We do not need to compare ourselves to the US or to anybody, but instead we should acknowledge the greatness of our own country. To do that, we need to appreciate our past, stop toppling statues and burning churches, cease apologizing but understand our mistakes, and we need to respect our heroes. Those who founded Canada faced incredible challenges. So imagine how to span our enormous landmass. There were no cars or internet. How to unite the 2 European founding countries and the indigenous people already living here. How to progress in spite of the extreme weather out there and the vast expanses of rugged territory. And how to create a system of governance that would stand the test of time. They were successful and created what Conrad Black correctly calls the only transcontinental bicultural, parliamentary confederation in the history of the world. We are not a post-national state with no core identity. Canada is a nation with a history that needs to be celebrated, with a strong culture that can serve to assimilate newcomers, and with a hard-working people who deserve the opportunity to succeed. President Trump's threats have made Canadians scared and maybe has shaken some out of their complacency. Mais notre potentiel semble totalement gaspillé en ce moment. But today, Canadians are burdened by taxes, identity politics, and gatekeepers. The extremist progressive agenda panders to every special interest group. Our resources are being sacrificed at the altar of climate change, something that had an impact more profound here in the West than anywhere else. Our debt has doubled, and the cost of servicing this debt, the annual interest, is greater than the total of what we spend on national defense, just the interest. Our young people struggle to find their own home, and our productivity is one of the lowest on the scale of the OECD. Internationally, with no moral clarity, we don't stand up for our friends in Israel. We tolerate violent protests, complete with the burning of Canadian flags, by cowards with their faces covered, like those that have raged across Canada since the 7th of October. We need a grand vision so that those who come here can integrate into our country or go home. We're a country built on the Judeo-Christian values of tolerance, respect, peace, order, and good government. Immigrants must come here wanting to be Canadian, not to use Canada as a place to foster the hatred they may have left behind. Sadly, today we are not far from seeing the creation of no-go areas in our cities, just as is happening in Europe. This must not be tolerated. All Canadians need a vision that benefits the collective good and for which we are willing to make sacrifice. Internationally, our reputation is in tatters, absolument pathétique. The respect we deservedly earned years ago on the world stage has disappeared as we've become strident virtue signalers. It seems, as someone said, that Canada never misses a chance to be small. But our Prime Minister sure likes to lecture other countries. The result internationally is that not only are we not consulted, we are not even thought of. Now, when I spoke at the presentation of the Vimy Award, I said that what we needed to bring Canada back from its current state, in my view, is leadership and service. Et je crois que c'est toujours le cas. Leadership and service, these two crucial foundations of greatness for any nation, have somehow become secondary here in Canada. Lost in these days of entitlement, me first, not my problem, and endless subsidies and handouts. So let me start with leadership. Leadership is necessary in everything and at all levels. Great leaders distinguish themselves with the success of what or who they lead, whether that be a country, an army, a corporation, or a sports team. I have my own leadership principles, and I look at these young people here. You need to have your leadership principles. You should think about it in order to be successful. In my personal view, a good leader needs to communicate, enhance and foster teamwork, behave professionally, expect professionalism, and project a positive attitude. Teamwork means you unite all under one vision and do not denigrate any part of the team. This is why I say our leaders need to unite all Canadians under one vision to which we can aspire. Our leaders will need courage to make the right decisions for our country as a whole. For example, pipelines, even if not all areas of Canada agree. Once the decision is made, then you communicate it to Canadians. Make us all believe. Et maintenant, pour ce qui est du service, many have shown us what service is. President Zelensky, for me, for one. Of course, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, from right here in Calgary, Dr. Haley Wickenheiser, Preston Manning, and even Senator Ted Cruz. Now, I didn't know Ted Cruz was born in Calgary, but I do now. But also, Private Jess La Rochelle, star of military valor, a Canadian hero from the war in Afghanistan who died a year ago from his wounds. Now, not every Canadian that serves need to put their life on the line for their fellow man. But there are, as the motto of Canada Company states, many ways to serve. Being a citizen of this great country comes with incredible benefits. You only need to travel to some of the less fortunate nations of the world to realize it, as my wife and I did while in uniform. Donc, le privilège d'être un citoyen du Canada vient avec des responsabilités. The privilege of being a citizen of Canada also comes with responsibilities. Yes, personal responsibility to behave like a good citizen, to keep peace, order, and support good governance. But it also behooves all Canadians to serve their nation, their community, or their fellow citizen in some way. We don't have to look far to see someone who's having greater challenges than we are. Have we done all we can to help them? Volunteerism was one of President Ronald Reagan's tenets. I saw a video of Reagan today speaking about tariffs. Now there was a leader and a communicator. As he called it, volunteerism is one of the well springs of our greatness as a nation, our willingness to serve each other. Of course, JFK famously said at his inauguration, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Margaret Thatcher believed that there's no such thing as an entitlement unless someone has first met an obligation. Amen. My wife is the smartest person I've ever met. She told me to say that. No. She did. She says, though, that every government talks about reinforcing the middle class and providing things like $10 a day care, yes, dental plan, CERB, and other efforts to support all the special interest groups. So now, what sacrifice is that middle class prepared to make in return to this providential country that's providing all these benefits? We need a manifesto, a call to service and volunteerism. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said, "A civilization is built on what is required of men, not what is provided for them." There is, of course, service to our nation in our military. Our government has never inspired Canadians to believe it is honorable to wear the Canadian maple leaf on their sleeve, whether as a young cadet, a reservist, or a regular member of our Canadian forces. Even at policy announcements, no mention is made of the value of service to Canada. Heck, often there isn't even a uniformed member present at these announcements. Every member of Parliament ought to recognize the value of armed forces personnel, and not just during times of crises. Now, you've all heard the issue, probably, of the 2% of GDP that we agreed, that Canada agreed to spend on our military. You may also know that we've never met that minimum, and again, there are words, but no plans to reach it at this time. Am I the only one that sees this as a breach of contract, not just to our allies, but to the men and women of our armed forces? They are empty promises that are just more virtue signaling. And we are one of the only outliers in NATO, and my NATO colleagues tell me that this target has now moved to 3%. But really, let's think about this for a minute. Regardless of the target, whether it's 2, 3, or more percent, should we not be able to defend our country? This audience knows the perilous state of the Canadian Armed Forces. I say Canada is unarmed, undefended, and our role in the world and our reputation have been shaken by the actions of our leaders and our disregard for our own security and sovereignty. Now, just this week, you may have heard an internal report on the armed forces was released that said there's a greater percentage of obese and overweight personnel in the Canadian Armed Forces than in the general population. What else can go wrong? And the young men and women who accept to serve in our military today are still outstanding Canadians who do a great job even if there are not enough of them. I should know, 2 of my 4 children are currently serving, and my daughter's right there at the bottom on that poster. As part of our end of the moral contract, we citizens of Canada owe them. We need to give them all the tools they need to be successful, and then to look after them when they complete their service. Ce contrat moral est brisé. The moral contract is broken. At this point, we are not giving them the tools they need to be successful, and we're not looking after them when they return. Our forces are missing some 16,000 personnel out of an establishment of 100,000. In World War II, a unit that had been degraded by 15% would be pulled out of the line and declared ineffective. So you could actually say the Canadian Armed Forces are currently ineffective. We have a group of great Canadians commanding the multinational brigade in Latvia, the NATO multinational brigade in Latvia. These 2,000 personnel are doing a great job. But did you know that it takes the entire Canadian Armed Forces to support them? In Canada, military housing and facilities are falling apart. The equipment's only 50% ready to be employed. And some of my sources say it's more like 80 and 90% for armored vehicles. Now, there are ways to reinforce and fix our military and prepare our country to defend itself. We need to improve our industrial base, just as recommended by the Business Council of Canada. We should put the defense industry on increased vigilance footing, not to say war footing. We need to give the forces the budget. Remove gatekeepers from the procurement process. Re-energize recruiting through a call to service. And maybe get outside help from recently retired personnel in whom the flame of service still burns. There are a few of those out there that I can see there. We should bank, as we did in the world wars, on our reserves to plug the most immediate holes. And I've been astounded at the lack of support for our reserves. And more importantly, get back to a meritocratic system that produces warriors. Ethical and disciplined warriors, not proclaiming their individuality with man buns and fingernail polish, but true warriors, men and women prepared to win our wars and defend our country and its values. Men and women who are proud to wear the uniform and that red maple leaf on their shoulder. Mes amis, it sometimes feels like our current government hates Canada. They want us to be ashamed of our past. It also feels like Canadians have never been as divided. As I said, we need to unite Canadians under a grand vision that reflects our values, our strength, our aspirations, and our hope. So you heard 25 years ago, it was a huge honor for me to command the funeral of the unknown soldier in Ottawa. I traveled to Vimy in France to witness the handover of the remains of a World War I soldier who had died for Canada fighting in the trenches of that horrible conflict. Upon return to Canada, the casket was placed in the Hall of Honor on Parliament Hill for 3 days, and thousands of Canadians came by to pay their respects to that hero who represented all those who had sacrificed there today for our tomorrow. Then I led the funeral procession with arms reversed through Ottawa to escort him to his final resting place. Now that was an event that fostered Canadian patriotism. Do you suppose the unknown soldier would be happy to see that the country he fought for and died for had lost its confidence? It is time for the silent majority to emerge from their bubble with open eyes and ears, to experience this amazing country and the wider world, and to participate in society. We can make Canada better with common sense, to unite our country rather than divide it, to apply our leadership and our service, to live with compassion, tolerance, and respect, but most of all, to be proud of Canada and everything we once stood for. I do believe we live in the greatest country in the world, founded by our First Nations, French and English settlers, and untold immigrants who chose to be Canadian. We have almost unlimited resources, a tolerant and diverse people, and an educated population who can aspire to the greatest heights. A country for which the greatest generation and countless others since were prepared to lay down their lives. We must be prepared to serve our country and be proud to do so, and our leaders must share this common sense vision and lead us to it. Because if not us, who? If not now, when? Merci beaucoup encore une fois, and God bless you and God bless Canada.
Okay, at this time, we're going to move to the question and answer period. So my first question, I call this one the butter and guns question. So in your book, you state rightly that no government has made the point of the physical threats that we face, even here at home, with the advances in weaponry and with guidance technology. We want our social programming, yet we must now invest in defense for the very real Russian threat we'll likely face in 5 years or so. Both our last chiefs of defense staff have said that we need to be ready with NATO within 5 to 7 years. They're not making this up. And in the work that I do, I see some of the indicators and the warnings that are telling us that these things are coming. So, General, how would you concretely explain this threat to Canadians such that the dock worker at the Port of Montreal or our oil sands workers understand this new reality, that we are no longer insulated from the geographically from the battlefields overseas?
Thank you very much. Good night. Well, that's a huge question. Of course, it's a matter of, I said one of my leadership principles is communications, and you need to communicate. You need to be out there explaining what's going on. We have outstanding intelligence officers. You're probably one of them that know the dangers that we're facing, and the danger is not going to happen in 5 years. The danger is today. Okay, the danger is today. We are under attack as we speak, from cyber things, from interference from countries, and we are defending ourselves. The Canadian Security Establishment, and all our institutions are working very hard, and I don't have any inside information. I'm just telling you what I know is happening. But the government has never really kind of explained the importance of doing this, and if we're going to put any more money into defense, we're not going to be able to do it because it's going to compete with all the social programs that Canadians absolutely love. We're not going to be able to do it unless we do explain why we're doing this. And so it's a huge job. It starts with the Prime Minister. It has to go down to Cabinet, then to all members of Parliament of any color and any party need to understand the importance of defense. It is the one non-partisan kind of issue, I would think, that we should all get behind. But it's very, very difficult. Our Parliament is quite divided, as you know, right now, for very good reasons. So it would take a huge effort, but I think Canadians are smart and would understand it. And so the effort needs to start yesterday.
General, I find it hard to express just how much I enjoyed your speech, your presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I can't think of anything that you said that I could disagree with,
Thank you.
which I find very gratifying.
Here,
My
here.
question is, what are your thoughts on, somebody at a meeting I was in just within the last week or so suggested we should have compulsory service, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, well, I speak from a little bit of experience from 1978 to 1980. I served with the French Army, who at that time had conscription soldiers, and I commanded conscripts for 14 months. I'll tell you the level of patriotism that you could foster with national service, national military service, was incredible. These young men, they were all men then, came from all across France, would come to a regiment, and it was a 1-year service. They would have 1 month of kind of basic training, then they would either be a driver or a gunner or something else, or logistician, etc. But I'll tell you what, at the end of their 12 month, I felt I could take my troop and I could go to war against the Soviet hordes in those days. I could defend. So, it's great for the Army because it makes a great soldier if you do it properly. It's also great for the nation because every one of these guys then were let go back into the population, and you would meet any French man, or at that time, as I say, man, and you could say, where did you do your military service? And they could talk about where they were and what they did and all that stuff. And some of them enjoyed it, some did not. I mean, let's just face it. I don't think in Canada we need to go that far. But I believe that there would be some usefulness in having a sort of national service. It doesn't have to be in the military, but what about Parks Canada or some of the other departments to help our country? What better way to show young Canadians, different parts of our country, to show Canadians some of our history, some of the beauty of our country. I think it has a lot of merit, and we just need to think about how to do it. Sweden has just reinstated a year or two ago its military service. So these things are being thought of. I know that in France there's also some talk about having some sort of national service, maybe 6 months there or something like that. It doesn't need to be a year, but you could certainly have some sort of service. So I believe it's important, and as I said, the two things that I think needs to bring our country back is leadership and service.
Okay, I have a question from the Zoom audience. Pardon me. Aside from budget or funding out for the military, what is the single greatest strategic change that must be made to Canadian military?
I think it needs to be a strategic change among citizens and their government. It needs to start there, and it needs to start with the Prime Minister, the cabinet ministers, and I mentioned this about the importance of the armed forces. That's where it needs to, and then it needs to permeate to citizens. I mean, I've been flying, right? I flew from Winnipeg yesterday. I mean, when you're in the United States, they call, VIPs and any military or veterans in the audience, in the gate, come right up, and they go sit first. What a great way of thanking those who served or those who are serving. It's just not in our DNA, but we need to change that. We can change that. Every citizen needs to understand the importance. I bet you, if I asked you in the audience, how many know a military person? This is not a good audience, but let's go, because you all do. But if you go to a hockey game and ask, say, everybody in the hockey arena, put your hand up those that have, know somebody in the military or have family in the military or have been in the military or veterans, etc. You're going to get, I think 90% are going to put their hands up. So why aren't we more supportive of our military? There's 600,000 veterans in Canada right now, many of whom are here. So I think that to me is the biggest strategic change. And then of course that leads to a whole bunch of other stuff. Better support when people complete their service, and so on and so forth. Thanks for the question.
Hi, it's Stephen Howell, and there seems to be a problem with procurement. I know that Viking Air had approached the Canadian Air Force to redo the Buffalo, and they were going to put in new engines, bigger engines, put in a glass cockpit. They had all the details for the Canadian Air Force, and they turned it down. And then they went ahead and did the Kingfisher, which was built in Spain. It was supposed to roll out 2 years ago, and it's not rolling out. And so, what is the problem with procurement?
There are many problems with procurement. I flew in the Buffalo, fantastic airplane. I brought a contingent of the French Army when I was on exchange. We came to visit our sister regiment in Valcartier, and we were very happy. They gave us a Buffalo to fly these guys around, about 20 of them. And I asked the pilot to, one time to do a short, they could do short takeoff and landing, and scared the crap out of the French guys that were in there, but they're great aircraft. Look, the problem with procurement, there are many problems with procurement. I mentioned gatekeepers. Those are people who are in the chain who can give the approval, who actually are happier to say no because they don't have to do any work then than to say yes. Part of the problem. Courage. The F-35 we could have bought so many years ago, and I think it was I'm sure there's lots of reasons why we didn't, but we had been participating in that program to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars right from its development. So there was not a question of, okay, we're going to develop and then we'll see if it's the best aircraft out there. How stupid. You develop it and then you buy the darn thing. We should have done it a long time ago. but politics got involved. So courage, making the decisions. We have shown that we can buy kit quickly. During Afghanistan, our Minister of Defense was Gord O'Connor, who Steve and I know him very well. And Gord O'Connor, like him or not, he was making decisions. We bought, we bought the C-17s, we bought tanks, we bought helicopters, and it was done very quickly. When the minister and the prime minister are aligned, it can happen quickly, because the bureaucrats, those who buy the kit, will line up very quickly once those guys are aligned. The other thing is that 16,000 people were missing in the forces. That is the middle strata of the forces. You've got your senior officers and soldiers, and you've got your junior officers and soldiers, and in the middle you've got that strata of captains, majors, sergeants, and warrant officers. A lot of those guys, certainly on the officer side, and even in the NCO side, are project managers. They are the ones who buy the kit. So a lot of those guys are gone, those people are gone. Men and women are fed up and have left because probably of DIE and many other things, but I don't want to go there unless you want to. And so you're missing that strata that does a lot of the work. And to make that strata, to get to that strata, you need 15 years, so you can recruit everybody you want. It's going to take time for them to get up to that level to be able to manage. So procurement is, and I'm not an expert in procurement. I was working for a while as an armored procurement guy, but it was very short, and I didn't learn enough. But these are the things that I'm told, and these are the things that I've seen myself.
So I have to bring an analogy. I'm listening tonight as to how far we might be behind in bringing our military back up to standard. The key word to me is budget. I've heard the number of 2% within NATO. It sounds like from your description and what knowledge I have of the military, aside from even participating in NATO with the 2%, we need money to be dedicated to our military with all of the ideas that you were speaking of, housing, teaching the younger set as to how important it is and make them proud to participate. But it's only at times, perhaps like this, when we've seen what's happened in the news in the last while, that we get patriotic, and then we want everything. I'm a geologist, as you know, and 15 years ago I heard about something called the Ring of Fire, okay? And I'm not talking about, in the Pacific, I'm talking about Northern Ontario, where all of a sudden, over the 15 years, our politicians went up to take a picture and said, this is going to be the next best thing since sliced bread. The other day, they just said, okay, critical elements and minerals, 30 million to get a road up there, and maybe it's a little too late, maybe it's not going to help quickly enough. My analogy is to that. We have so many things we're spending on, and our budget isn't good. So what does the military and/or whoever it is that's leading our country have to do to say the military needs not only 2% for NATO, but the extra to bring us back up? We have to do some housekeeping here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Larry. So Larry and I went to high school together in Thunder Bay. Listen, it's all those things that I've already mentioned. We need a government that's going to convince Canadians of the importance of defense. But you're right. We also need visionaries. We need people who are thinking ahead. They talked about the Ring of Fire 15 years ago, and it finally actually, they're finally getting some movement now. Many of you might have heard of Lieutenant General Richard Romer, Canadian pilot in the Second World War. General Romer, I think in the 60s, talked about a northern corridor. He proposed that Canada should have a northern corridor that goes above, probably in the north part of all our provinces, that could be developed. Well, he was he was ahead of his time. We need this kind of visionary, and I also got in the 90s, I went on a course, and we had a climatologist in the 90s talk to us, and he said, Canada is going to become much more temperate in the northern regions, you know, and then Arizona and those places are going to be 150 degrees. People won't be able to live there. So we're going to have to think about developing our north, and, you know, the Northwest Passage, you've all heard that, you know, it will be free of ice year long, et cetera, et cetera. So we need this kind of visionary. It is going to take the forces probably much more than 5 or 10 years to get back to where they should be. And I think we need to go beyond now. If we're going to defend our country, we're going to need more than 70,000 or 85,000 regular force soldiers. I think we should have 100,000 reservists in Canada, because the reserves are what gives the connection to the population. In every little town in Canada, there's a reserve unit, a reserve subunit, and the only time Canadians see somebody sometimes is a reservist who's going to parade on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night. So let's put the emphasis on those guys. And, you know, let's think about it. In World War II, the permanent force were not the ones that went to war. They trained people and then sent them out to war. So, you know, we need to improve our reserves and do better there. But it's going to take a long time.
Could you clarify for us a little bit what the 2% of budget compared to our GDP actually means? I think there's maybe some misconceptions that it is 2% for NATO versus what it actually is.
Yeah, it's 2% of the GDP to be spent on the military, on your military forces. So Army, Navy, Air Force, Special Forces. You could include in there some paramilitary, and a lot of nations are trying to, you know, jiggery poker to get some stuff under there, but really it's for the military forces. So 2% right now, I think, I don't have the figures. I think we're spending 25 billion or something like that. If somebody knows, please yell it out. But it would need to double to get to 2%. Need to double. We're spending 1.3 or 1.4% of our GDP on the military right now, and it's not enough. And I'm telling you, 2% is the bottom. 2% is the floor, not the roof.
So our national defense budget is around the $40 billion mark. And if you're following NATO developments at the next NATO meeting in June, the discussion now is going to be about increasing that to 3%. So if we're only sitting at 1.4% now, you can imagine how much of more of a gap we will have. Sir, the next question is from the current Commandant of the Canadian Army Command and Staff College. The young leaders I see are very smart and eager to serve. However, I worry for the morale over the midterm. I'm afraid our country has no actual will to generate the massive people or equipment and material to really make a difference to allies and partners in a crisis, unless the country's attitude towards the CAF changes and we get resourced adequately. So the question is, how do we maintain morale and motivation across the rank and file? How do we attract and retain talent?
Well, what we do is everything that we've just been talking about. What do? We need to have a call to service. You need to fund the forces, fix procurement, and you know, train and recruit and get everybody going. As far as morale goes, that is his job. That is the job of every leader in the armed forces, to make sure that people understand that we're all working towards the same thing. But it's going to be difficult to improve morale if ordinary citizens don't believe the armed forces are important. You know, you could be as good a leader as you want, but you have to, you know, have the backing. I mean, you know, and I talk about the moral contract. Everybody understand what the moral contract is? The moral contract is that the military, those who decide to serve, are willing to put their life on the line for their country, for you, for me, for us. Okay? We're not going out there. They're going out there. We're sending them out there. They're either defending our country, projecting their values, doing the things that our government, our leaders, on behalf of its citizens says, you will do this. And they do this, if necessary, they can lose their life, or they can order someone to go and do something that will make them lose their life. That's the one side of that's their part of the contract. Our part of the contract is that we should give them the best equipment, the best training, the best education, the best leadership that will ensure that they are successful in those jobs, in those things that we ask them to do. And then when they come back, the other part of the contract is we look after them when their service is completed. That moral contract I talked about is broken. We're not doing it. Okay, the government's not doing it. We citizens are not asking our government to do it. So we got to do that, and I think that will make the job of the commandant there a little bit easier, because then he can talk about your citizens love you, and they thank you for your service every time you see somebody in uniform. And you go to the U.S., this is all the time. Every NFL game, every game in the United States, you've got some military. They've always got one guy being honored or one gal being honored. Why can't we do that? Why can't we do that? We're not I think a patriotic people. We got to show it a little bit more.
General Maisonneuve, thank you for coming tonight and talking to us. My father served in World War II in the Navy, and there is a marked difference between how he was treated in Canada, flying and traveling through Canada, and flying and traveling in the U.S. For no good reason. They saw him wearing a Legion cap and gave him great honors at every situation. I know we could do more and better here. I think you're a great advocate for our military. I think you could do great things with what you're talking about in your mission. How can we serve you in your mission?
Well, first of all, talk about tonight to all those you know. Don't talk about me. Talk about the messages. Talk about the importance of service. Talk about your dad. We're crying out loud. To everybody who will listen, get out there and get the good word. Write to your MP. Seriously, write to your member of parliament. And the other thing, I think you need to talk to your younger generations. You young men and women who are here, I'm very proud to see you. So, you hope you're getting the idea, the message of serving your country in any capacity possible. And so you guys talk to your girlfriends, boyfriends, and high school, classmates, etc. It's going to have to be a citizen-led thing, I think, if we're going to change this. I do my best, but just one guy. Well, we need to talk about this. We need to get it out in front.
This is a question from Daniel Lawn. His question is that he visits, and everywhere he goes, Canadian heroism is evident. So I guess he's touring battlefields and different places, that kind of thing. So he's wondering, how do we tell our own stories to our population? Our friends to the south, i.e. the Americans, are very good at that. So how do we improve telling our stories?
I guess education, and now at this point I should give this to Dr. Bergerson to talk about education, history education. But I think we don't do a very good job. I think education in high school, etc., can be improved. The history of our country, those who fought for us. Our universities also right now, I think there used to be more programs that would fund some, defense, military history programs. We need perhaps more of those. And when Canadians go visit the battlefields in Europe, it has an incredible effect. I mean, some of you might have been there, but when you walk around and you see the graves of these young 18, 19-year-old men and women, mostly men obviously, it rips your heart right out. You go to Vimy, go see that. Go to Dieppe, incredible. Go to Normandy, see Juno Beach. The Juno Beach Center just been remodeled, fantastic place. So you need to see it, but there is actually an initiative right now that a group of folks led by Tony Trigiani in Halifax, in Toronto. He's trying to build a replica of the of Mother Canada that is on the Vimy Memorial in Cape Breton. Imagine that, right on the edge of Cape Breton, looking out towards Europe, this huge statue of Mother Canada, you know, with her hand out, saying, you know, I sent my young men to fight. And if we had that in Canada, you wouldn't have to go necessarily to Vimy to see it. You could actually go there and, you know, un peu de recueil to see this. But environmentalists are saying, oh no, it's pristine ground and you can't do that. I can't believe that that's the case, but this gives you an idea of what Canada is today, what we think of our past and our military.
Hello, General. A friend of mine said that we don't have to worry about the 2% GDP because we're going to have to just reduce our GDP to the point that we're going to get there anyway. But how do we get rid of the corruption in the procurement process? Like the stuff that happened with Admiral Norman was a tragedy, and all the stuff that's gone through with the icebreakers and the new destroyers and all the equipment, it always seems to come to a mess because of this.
Yeah, if I knew, I probably wouldn't be here right now. I'd probably be running the procurement system. But look, I don't. One of the things that I've seen, the experience I've had, is that every time we try to buy a piece of kit, we're always trying to Canadianize it. You know, we're always trying to, you know, we're saying, oh, that button should be here instead of there because we like the button there, as opposed to buying it the way the thing is designed. Every time you change a design, millions of dollars it costs, you know, to do. The other thing is there are things like industrial regional benefits that we need to, you know, that the Canadian government forces us to do. And I think it's, you have to, the company who's going to produce the kit has to spend 100% of the amount of what you're buying in Canada. So there are incredible kind of rules, and you know, Ian Brody could probably give you the, you know, the whole thing about it, but it's very difficult. As far as corruption goes, I don't know if there's much corruption. I don't know, I really, and I don't know what you mean about Admiral Norman. Mark is a friend, and I think he's a great Canadian, and he was, and I've never discussed it with him because he can't talk about it, but I think he was doing a great service to Canada. If you don't know what happened, it's something about the Asterix was a replenishment ship that we were asking Davy Shipbuilding in Quebec City to refit. It was a regular civilian ship that they were going to make into a replenishment ship, and they were doing a great job doing it. But I think there was some question as to whether it was going to go. And anyway, Mark was involved and was charged, but I think the charges were dropped eventually. So there wasn't a corruption on his part for sure. But and that ship now is sailing, and it's been sailing for 10 years maybe, but doing a great job.
This is from Andy Keyworth. So his question is as follows, and this is along the same lines with procurement and what's the best way to go about it. To what degree should the material needs of the CAF be exclusively contracted to and provided by Canadian industry? He says this is essential to ensuring Canadian jobs, guarantee provision of resources not dependent on unreliable US or Canadian trade relations, etc. And you've already mentioned IRBs, industrial regional benefits, the ITBs, industrial technical benefits. Where do you see that when we have programs like the F-35, which is obviously in cooperation with the US? Some equipment is made here, but others must be procured offshore.
Yeah, that's a tough job. It's a tough thing. First of all, Canada cannot produce everything that we need. It's just a fact. We can't produce tanks. We produce great light armored vehicles in London, Ontario. But some of the stuff that we can produce We should be producing now, and in great quantities. We can produce ammunition very well. You know, there's a place in Ontario, I think it's in Ingersoll, Ontario. There's a company that's producing 15,000 rounds of 155 ammunition for the US Army per month. For the US Army per month. So, why can't we produce it for ourselves? You know, it's kind of silly. So we do have to go offshore for some of this stuff. But I think that sometimes, you know, we have this desire, because there are big contracts, to say, okay, we're gonna take 3, you know, submissions, and we're gonna look at the best, and the one that can do the best IRBs, etc., and then we choose. And this is all what takes time. That's all the time that's taken to do all this and go through it. I think we need to update the processes, you know, make it quicker, get people to make decisions quicker, and we can fix this. But there's no way we can produce everything in Canada. Well, we should produce everything we can in Canada and only the other stuff outside.
So I'll take the follow-on question. If we were able to come up with, in a significant way, with urgent operational requirements for our needs in Afghanistan, why can we not go down that path on a more routine basis when we're not technically at war, but we're getting ready?
Well, that's exactly what I was saying. We need to put industry on an increased vigilance footing. You know, we could say we put them on a war footing. We can't do that. We're Canadian. We're very nice. But we should put ourselves on an increased vigilance footing. And I'll tell you what, business in Canada is ready to do it. I mentioned the Business Council of Canada put out a report a few months ago that said, here, we're ready to support. Here's what we think we can do. And it's a great report, but again, this report's been given to government, it's been given to the opposition, to every MP who wants to get it, but there's nothing happening. In industry, imagine the jobs. You know, the question there talked about jobs. Yeah, I mean the jobs this would create in Canada. Somebody mentioned military housing. I think you did. Military housing is falling apart. It's completely falling apart. Our instruction classrooms, you know, the buildings are old, like buildings of the 60s. Somebody who joins the military goes into a classroom, and the classroom's falling apart. You're using overhead projectors from 1980. You know, this is just foolish, you know, and no wonder it doesn't help recruiting at all. So we need to fix all that, and it would be easy to put money into that. Imagine building housing, building private married quarters for the soldiers on the bases. Imagine what that would be like. You know, it's part of the whole housing crisis we're having in Canada. So you could help fix that.
Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation. I got 4 Calgary-based solutions that could address that housing problem right away. That might actually move our spend towards that 2%, which it should actually be 5%. But Atco, Sprung, Dirt, and Falkridge do modular construction based here that would be great for solutions at a base level and also for the families. But I think one of the themes that keeps coming up but nobody's really chatting about it is a communications problem. Defense has been woefully underfunded and prioritized for generations. We take our foot off the gas so many times as it relates to defense, and yet we have amazing officers and military officials and intelligence officials that have articulated good plans for getting us back on track, and yet it gets lost. And in the last point you just mentioned that, it gets lost amongst government. They're public servants, they're not public leaders, politicians. Let's direct them how to fix things a little bit better. And I think part of that is the message is getting lost. It's in too many narrow channels. How could you broaden it out to the general public in a bigger sense so that we can be better allies to you in articulating what needs to be done over the next little while, and make sure that we don't have a complacent and indifferent populace, but rather educate them?
Yeah, that's there's the solution right there. You're absolutely right. The Department of National Defense, the Canadian Armed Forces have always been crappy communicators, horrible. And that's partly because some governments in the past have said, no, we're going to tighten the message, and we will give you the messaging, and fight with the Canadian Forces. That was a message, right, and all that. But the messages are sometimes very tightly controlled by governments who don't want people to make mistakes. Now, one of the problems also is that they think that to be able to speak in public and have a communication strategy, you need to be a public affairs professional. And I always say, no, you go to any US base, get any colonel or general to stand up and give you a briefing, it's going to be so squared away, you're going to be impressed. Our people can do exactly the same, okay? We can do it. Our soldiers can do the same. The best people to talk to reporters and to talk to Canadians are soldiers, like the privates, corporals, sergeants. These guys and gals, I'll tell you, they'll knock you off your, you're gonna be so impressed. So we got to do a better job of that. And so how do we fix it? Well, I'm hoping that at some point communications will be better with a proper strategic communication plan where we spend the money to really explain what the forces do, to really explain the threats that somebody was talking about, explaining the threats, explaining to Canadians the threats that we face and for what reason and who exactly is under threat. We are all under threat. And so once we do that, then you're right, it's going to be much easier for Canadians to understand why we're spending money on defense and not on this special interest. And there are so many that I'm sure we can find the money, but it's going to require very tough decisions, very courageous decisions that you make, then you explain. Here's why we decided to do this. Here's why we're spending this much here. And we shouldn't, again, NATO says you should have a 2% and maybe go to 3 eventually. President Trump says you're not spending enough. Everybody says you're a free rider. That doesn't make any difference. We Canadians, we should say, God, we got to be able to defend ourselves, And if you say, okay, what do we need to defend ourselves? Let's take a white sheet of paper and start saying, okay, we need this, how many ships, you count where are they going to go and where you need to defend. You need some to go to the north, some to go east, west, etc., etc. How many soldiers? We need we need this many. And then you kind of do your tally sheet and you count how much that costs. Probably going to be 3% of GDP. Okay, but that's how we should do it, as opposed to saying, oh, because we need to spend 2% or 3%, we're going to do this and add this and add that. I just think we need to defend ourselves. We need to be able to do that. So it's a long-winded answer, but I think you're right. Communications, we need a proper strategic communication plan.
And I'll just add to that. If you think of our brigade that is standing up in Latvia, should they face the Russians at some point in the next 5 to 7 years, they currently have approximately 3 days worth of ammunition. Just think about that. 3 days. What are they supposed to do when we know that from the Russian-Ukrainian war that the rate of consumption of artillery is significantly higher, by orders of magnitude, above what the planning has been for the last 20 years, where we were focused on the war on terrorism. It's a different ballgame, and we are back to peer-on-peer conflict. Karen, do we have another question from the audience?
Merci, thank you. It's good to see you again. But this is not a plan, but it's sort of a follow-on from the question from the gentleman in the front. When you talked about communication, you talked about communication downwards and outwards to Canadians. I would actually like to put your mind at ease. Certainly speaking for this city and this province, I have experienced, whether it's at the airport or selling a car, people, 15-year-old catchers on a ball team or their dad or whatever coming up and saying, thank you for your service. Flattens me every time. So I'm not actually terribly concerned that it's going to take too much communications downwards and outwards to mobilize Canadians behind this stuff. My question is, it's upwards. There's a glass ceiling. You said, rate your MP, that you've worked at NDHQ, you've worked in that world.
you can only go so much before you start to run into, I'm gonna call it the glass ceiling. I guess my real question is how much of the problems that we're facing right now is a lack of, I'm not gonna say effort, but a lack of push by our senior leadership to break through this. You and I have actually had this conversation in Brussels one day, and I'm not picking on you for that, but it's because both at NDHU and in Foreign Affairs where I worked, it's the same thing. There's a level at which nothing seems to permeate, and the issues that we raise are not being considered where things really need to be considered, if you follow what I mean. Do you understand, sir?
I do, thank you. Deuxième. Steve, thank you. You're absolutely right. There seems to be, there is a huge responsibility by our seniors to ensure that the political level gets the information and acts on the information. Before I wrote the book, after my speech, after some of my op-eds in the National Post, who were very kind to give me a space, I met a major, a fairly senior major who had retired and said, "Sir, I never heard of you before. How come you're talking now? And why didn't you talk when you were in the military? Why didn't you, make these points in the military?" So, and I addressed that in the book. When you're in the military or in the public service, you have a duty. Your freedom of speech is restricted. You're not allowed to comment on policy, government policy, etc., and that's the way it should be. You're there to implement. However, you can speak about your own job, and as you might have seen, Admiral Topshee, the commander of the Navy, put a video out a year ago that explained to his sailors, look, things are rough in the Navy right now. We're not going to have new ships for a while, but stick with it. And he was doing a great job, but I'm sure the government was not happy that he put this out. The other guy was Admiral Octorloni, who also he said at one point in the media, we're in danger. There's the enemy's at the gates almost, and I'm sure people were not happy that he was speaking. But you have to do that. There is a responsibility, and so. And what I explained is because of this duty to restrict your freedom of speech, you do what the hell you can inside the machine to, when you disagree with orders, you fight for, and if you can't take it, then you need to get out and say, okay, that's it, I can't do that. Now, our senior leaders, hopefully, now understand that they must keep the government on its toes and explain, the Chief of Defense Staff is the military advisor to the Prime Minister. That's her job right now. And so she needs to, when something's going wrong, needs to speak directly to the PM. During the, little story, after 9/11, I was sent down to Tampa with two brigadier, I was a major general, and went to Tampa to meet General Franks, who was the commander of Southcom, and he was, to see what Canada could provide to the war on terrorism. I was on the 7th of October. I was sitting just to the right of General Franks. On the left was a 3-star from the UK, and on the left of him was a 2-star from Australia. Canada, right there beside the US. On the screen was Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, who said the President Bush would have liked to be here, but he was called away. So go ahead, General Franks. What do you want to tell me? And Franks said, today at 12 o'clock, the first Tomahawk land attack missile will land on Kabul. It was the start of the war. So we were sitting right there. Canada was to the right of the commander. I got on the phone immediately and called our Chief of Defense Staff. It was a Sunday, if I remember. Called the Chief of Defense Staff, and he said, okay, no problem, I'm going to call the Prime Minister. Well, I heard after that he was having all kinds of trouble. People were saying, why do you want to call the Prime Minister? Why are you, the Chief of Defense Staff, going to speak to the Prime Minister? Come on, seriously. Okay, this is Canada, you know? And so, as much as we say, you know, senior officers need to make sure that information goes upwards, yes, and it's a responsibility, it's a duty, and so I think we need to do it, and those that are there now need to do it. I don't know if they're doing it, but it needs to be done.
So I'll take the last question. So I myself, I'm a second generation Canadian. Je suis né en France, I was born in France, raised in Quebec and Calgary, and I've also lived 13 years in Ottawa. My father found it difficult one day when I told him how I felt that I was more Canadian than French. He had a really hard time with that. So my question is, because there was an ECOS poll that came out this week, and we can say what we want about polls, but they're a little bit of an indicator. This particular ECOS poll looked at the attachment of all Canadians to Canada. And across the Conservative Party of Canada, the NDP, and the Green Party of Canada, there were more people who felt not attached or moderately attached to Canada than there were who were actually attached to Canada. So the question then becomes, how do we increase the sense of belonging to Canada for new Canadians and all Canadians? You spoke of replacing the melting pot, correction of getting towards a melting pot model rather than the mosaic. So how do we restore that sense of citizenship, that desire to serve, whether in our reserves or in whatever capacity of service we need?
Well, yeah, and I talked about this earlier. I mean, the first thing we need to do is define what a Canadian is. What is it that unites us? What is it that makes us Canadian? How, what do we believe makes us Canadian? And after that, then you need to educate people as to what that is. And when immigrants come, you need to say, well, you're welcome, join Canada. Here's what we are. Here's what a Canadian is. Join us and be patriotic. I mean, as opposed to saying, well, come here, you can keep your cultures, no problem. No, well, Canada, we're Canadian. This is our culture. Welcome. If you're going to stick with us, then that's great. If you don't want to be Canadian, well, go back to wherever you came from. That's just the way it is. So, but it's going to take then, after we decide what a Canadian is, you need to actually then educate, and it has to start right at the beginning in families, and then in schools, universities, and that's a whole other issue. Universities.
Merci beaucoup à tous.
Thank you very much, everybody.